On a stormy night in March 1847, neighbors swore they heard blood-curdling screams pouring out of the Rutherford plantation house, sounds that would linger in the memory of Pennsylvania County for generations. What started as a friendly poker match between tobacco planters turned into a wager so shocking, so morally corrupt, that county officials locked away every trace of the event for more than 100 years. The bet had nothing to do with cash or property. It was about human lives. And when the last card hit the table, the fallout tore through Virginia's most powerful circles, leaving behind unexplained deaths, bankrupt fortunes, and a cover-up that reached the very top of state government. Before we dive into the story of the Rutherford estate and the game that unraveled it all, take a moment to subscribe for more hidden pieces of dark history, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love connecting with history fans who aren't afraid to face the shadows of the past. What unfolded that night permanently changed how the wealthy families of Pennsylvania County viewed one another, and perhaps even more, how they viewed themselves. In 1847, Sponsia County was one of Virginia's richest tobacco regions, its sprawling plantations lining the Rappahannock River, like kingdoms ruled by men who believed their power placed them above consequence. The fertile soil worked for decades, grew some of the finest tobacco in the South, filling the vaults of families whose names could be found on banks, railroads, and government appointments across the Commonwealth. Among them stood the Rutherford estate, Thorngate Manor, a vast property of more than 3,000 acres. Colonel Harrison Rutherford inherited the land from his father, along with nearly 200 enslaved people whose labor built the family's wealth over 3 generations. The mansion itself was an imposing Georgian home with massive white columns and wide verandas, perched on a rise that looked out across endless waves of green fields. Harrison was 43 that spring, a man whose worth was measured not just in land and profits, but in his ability to maintain the fragile web of relationships that held Virginia's planter elite together. He sat on the county board, held stock in the Richmond and Rappahannock Railroad, and his opinions on tobacco prices could sway markets as far away as New York. But more than business, his pride was his daughter, Margaret Rutherford, 18 years old, and thought to be the most beautiful young woman across 3 counties. Margaret had the Polish expected of a planter's child. She spoke French, played piano brilliantly, and could hold her own in conversations on literature, making her a prized guest at gatherings across central Virginia. With auburn hair and piercing green eyes, she already had suitors from prominent families, though Harrison carefully controlled who was allowed to court her. Living under the same roof was Caesar Wellington, a man who stood apart from every expectation of slavery in antebellum Virginia. At 35, Caesar was born on the plantation yet had secretly learned to read and write, despite laws forbidding it. Even more unusual, he displayed an extraordinary gift for mathematics and what we would today call financial strategy. Harrison recognized this talent early on and, against the whispers of his neighbors, began relying on Caesar to keep the plantation's accounts and even advise him on investments. The partnership made Harrison richer than ever, but it created something unheard of in their world, a master leaning intellectually on a man he legally owned. Caesar was given better quarters than most enslaved workers, living in a small but comfortable room inside the mansion itself. More and more, Harrison sought his counsel on issues far beyond plantation ledgers. The other central figures in this story were Harrison's weekly poker companions, men whose gatherings had become almost legendary among the county's elite. Judge Cornelius Petton came first. His family had helped write Virginia's Constitution, and his rulings carried weight across the state. Then there was Dr. Samuel Fitzgerald, who owned the neighboring plantation and served as physician to most of the wealthy households nearby. The last was Marcus Bogard, newer to the group, a man from Charleston who had inherited vast wealth and was known for both his appetite for high-stakes wagers and his uncanny skill at spotting weaknesses in others. For more than 2 years, these four had gathered every Thursday night in Harrison's study, drinking bourbon, smoking cigars, and raising the stakes. What started as modest wagers had grown into contests where thousands of dollars might be lost in a single hand. But money was never the true prize. The games were about ego, control, and the subtle battles of influence among powerful men. By 1847, Virginia's social order was fraying. Tobacco prices were unstable, Northern criticism of slavery was increasing, and whispers of financial insecurity circulated quietly among planters who would never dare admit their doubts publicly. The future of slavery in new territories was hotly debated, threatening to split the South apart. It was in this atmosphere that the night of March 18, 1847, began. Rain drummed against the tall windows of Thorngate Manor as the men gathered in Harrison's lavish study. The room glowed with lamplight reflecting off polished mahogany furniture, its walls lined with leather-bound books, a marble fireplace roaring with oak logs that filled the space with warmth and flickering shadows across a Persian rug. Caesar had prepared everything, as always. The green felt poker table set, fresh cards stacked neatly, crystal decanters of bourbon and brandy filled to the brim. He worked with quiet precision, though anyone paying close attention might have noticed a strange weight in his movements that evening, a hesitation in the way his eyes moved around the room. Judge Petton arrived first, shaking rain from his coat and muttering about the roads. At 62, his sharp legal mind had shaped Virginia politics for decades, and his presence at these games gave them a stamp of legitimacy. Dr. Fitzgerald came next, medical bag in hand, as always, ready in case duty called. His cautious play and keen eye for human behavior served him at both the card table and in his profession. Finally, Marcus Bogard swept in. At 39, he radiated a charisma that drew others in while at the same time keeping them uneasy, an energy that would soon change the entire night's course. Marcus had studied at the College of Charleston, spent time in New Orleans perfecting what he proudly called the gentleman's arts, and returned to Virginia with both the fortune and the influence to buy up impressive estates. Though no one seemed quite sure where his money truly came from. "Gentlemen," Marcus declared as he dropped into his chair, a sly grin spreading across his face, "I trust you're ready for an evening to remember. Fortune has been favoring me lately." Harrison dealt the opening hand, while Caesar moved quietly around the study, topping off glasses and feeding the fire. The first games played out as usual, modest bets, idle talk about tobacco, politics, and local scandals. But as the bourbon flowed and the night stretched on, a subtle change crept into the air. Marcus, who had been losing hand after hand for nearly 2 hours, grew restless. His wagers grew bolder, his play more reckless. Judge Petton mostly folded, watching in silence as the tension between the other three rose. Dr. Fitzgerald stuck to his careful style, raking in small pots, but steering clear of risky showdowns. Harrison, meanwhile, was unusually lucky, winning again and again until his stack swelled by nearly $800, a fortune for most families in Virginia. And then, Marcus broke the rhythm. "Harrison, my friend," he said smoothly, shuffling a fresh deck like a man born to gambling tables, "why don't we raise the stakes? These small pots bore me. Let's make tonight truly unforgettable." Harrison eyed him, curiosity sharpened by whiskey. "What did you have in mind?" "One last hand," Marcus replied, pausing for effect. "Winner takes the table," and his voice slowed, letting the silence press down on the room. "Something more valuable than coin." Judge Petton leaned forward. "Marcus, what exactly are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting each of us put up something that actually matters, something worthy of remembrance." Marcus' eyes glittered in the firelight. "I'll start. My Charleston holdings, the rice plantation, and my house on East Bay Street. Combined value, more than $15,000. The room went silent. but for the rain hammering the windows and the crackle of oak in the hearth. $15,000 was enough to buy a large estate, or fund an entire railway line. Dr. Fitzgerald shook his head sharply. That's absurd, Marcus. None of us can match such a stake. Oh, but you can, Marcus countered smoothly. You're just not thinking boldly enough. A dangerous excitement surged in Harrison's chest. The bourbon, his winnings, and the thrill of dominance blended into a sense of invulnerability. What did you have in mind? He asked. Marcus smiled thinly. Judge Petton could put up his practice in all the political influence that comes with it. Dr. Fitzgerald could wager his medical estate. And you, Harrison. He paused, eyes locked on his host. You could offer the one thing of true value. Your daughter's hand in marriage. The words landed like a thunderclap. Caesar, frozen mid-pour at the brandy table, stopped breathing. Judge Petton's face drained of color. Fitzgerald let out an audible gasp. Harrison's first instinct was to laugh it off as drunken foolishness, but the challenge in Marcus's expression struck a chord. In the rigid social order of 1847, a man's power was measured by his control over his family's future. Refusing might be seen as weakness. Marcus Petton said gravely, "You're crossing a line. A young woman's life is not a stake to be gambled, isn't it?" Marcus shot back. "Do we not arrange marriages like business deals already? Wealth, alliances, reputation, at least this way, chance decides instead of backroom bargains." Harrison's thoughts spiraled. Margaret was indeed his most prized possession, beautiful, intelligent, and key to securing the family's legacy, and the law gave him absolute authority over her marriage. His voice came out before his reason caught up. "And if I were to accept, what would you place against such a wager?" Marcus leaned back, his polite mask slipping to reveal something cold and calculating. "I would put up Caesar." The study exploded with reactions. Judge Petton leaped to his feet, nearly toppling his chair. Fitzgerald stammered his outrage. But Marcus silenced them with a raised hand. "Think rationally. Caesar is no ordinary servant. He is Harrison's greatest asset beyond the land itself. His skills, his intelligence, his value is immense. Losing him would cripple the Rutherford estate. Gaining him would be priceless." Harrison's stomach knotted. Marcus had seen too much, understood too well the unspoken truth. Caesar was not just property, he was essential. Harrison had come to rely on his mind, his counsel, even his companionship. To risk losing him was unthinkable. To win him outright, intoxicating by making Caesar the counterwager, Marcus wasn't just betting property. He was daring Harrison to stake his pride, his dominance, and his future. Caesar stood motionless by the brandy, his face a careful mask, though his hands trembled against the crystal. Everyone knew they were discussing his life like an object on the table. Yet under Virginia law, his voice meant nothing. "Gentlemen," Harrison said finally, forcing calm into his tone, "I believe we now have the makings of a truly historic game." The fire snapped in the hearth, but its warmth seemed to vanish. Petton tried one last time to intervene, warning no man should gamble with innocent lives. But Harrison's pride was already steering him toward ruin. The mix of liquor, ego, and the lure of proving his superiority drowned out caution. Even Fitzgerald, torn between disgust and fascination, couldn't look away. To him, it felt like witnessing a medical experiment on the human soul, a test of how far pride could drive men past morality. Marcus began to shuffle, with practiced elegance, the cards flickering like sparks in the lamplight. "5-card stud," he announced. "One hand. Winner takes all. Do we agree?" Harrison's mouth had gone dry. "If I win, I keep Margaret and claim Caesar. If you win, you take Margaret's hand and Caesar remains mine." "Precisely," Marcus confirmed, his smile razor-sharp, "with one small detail. Caesar will deal the cards." The suggestion sent a fresh wave of shock through the room. Having an enslaved man handle the cards for a game with such enormous consequences was almost unheard of. But Marcus, true to his nature, framed it in a manipulative way. Who better to ensure fairness, he argued, than someone whose very future depended on honesty? Caesar had every reason not to cheat. His hands trembled as he accepted the deck, and the irony wasn't lost on anyone. His own life was on the line, yet he was the one dealing the game. As Caesar stepped to the head of the table, Harrison caught something in his eyes he'd never seen before. It wasn't fear exactly, but something sharper, kind of cold calculation. The dealing began painfully slow. Every movement was deliberate, his expression unreadable. His dark eyes never left the cards, focused entirely on the task. Harrison's first face-down card turned out to be the 10 of hearts. His face-up card, a king of spades. A strong opening that sent a rush of confidence through his chest. Marcus, meanwhile, revealed the jack of diamonds, while his hidden card stayed face down. The next round lifted the tension further. Harrison pulled the king of hearts, now showing a pair of kings. Marcus revealed the queen of diamonds, giving him a potential straight draw. The air grew heavy as the stakes became clearer. Pair of kings bets, Caesar murmured, almost whispering. Harrison pushed $500 forward, nearly half his winnings for the night. Marcus matched him without hesitation, eyes locked on Harrison's. The third card changed everything. Harrison drew the 10 of spades to pair, kings and tens, an enviable hand. Marcus's card, however, was the 10 of diamonds, and with his jack and queen already in play, the shadow of a straight loomed large. 2 pair bets, Caesar said. Harrison shoved the rest of his money into the pot, over $300. He locked eyes with Marcus. All in. Marcus smiled, cold and deliberate. Call. The final card sealed both men's fates. Harrison revealed the king of clubs, giving him a full house, kings over tens, an incredibly powerful hand, almost unbeatable. He felt triumph swell inside him, ready to laugh with relief. But then Marcus's last card hit the table, the 9 of diamonds. Now, with the jack, queen, and 10 of diamonds already showing, he had 4 to a straight flush. If his hidden card was either the 8 of diamonds or the king of diamonds, he'd hold an almost impossible, yet unbeatable, hand. The room fell into a silence so heavy it seemed the rain itself had stopped. Judge Petton clutched his chair until his knuckles whitened. Dr. Fitzgerald's chest froze mid-breath. Harrison stared at his full house, weighing the odds. Marcus needed one exact card. The chances were slim, but the risk was terrifying. "Gentlemen," Caesar said, his voice sharp against the stillness. "Time to reveal the whole cards." Harrison turned over his 10 of hearts. Full house. "Kings over tens," he said, though his voice cracked. Marcus reached slowly for his card, fingers trembling at the edge. The room seemed to hold its breath as he turned it. The 8 of diamonds, straight flush. 8, 9, 10, jack, and queen of diamonds. In poker, only a royal flush tops it. Harrison had nothing close. The silence that followed felt apocalyptic, as though the world itself had shifted. Harrison's full house, once a sure victory, now mocked him. He had gambled his daughter's future on a single card and lost. Marcus's voice, quiet but absolute, broke the stillness. "Gentlemen, I believe we have a winner." Hours later, as the fire burned low and the room glowed red, the weight of what had happened spread like poison. Harrison sat frozen at the table, staring at the cards that had sealed his daughter's fate. Caesar lingered by the window, watching the rain streak down the glass. Though Marcus now legally owned him, paperwork was still required before the transfer became official. Until then, he remained in a strange limbo at Thorngate Manor. "Master Harrison," Caesar finally said, reverting to the old formal tone they'd long abandoned. "What will you tell Miss Margaret?" Harrison lifted his head, and Caesar was stunned to see tears streaming down the man's face. Through all their years together, business struggles, deaths in the family, Financial crises. He had never seen Harrison cry. "I don't know," he whispered. "How do you tell your daughter you gambled her future away to a man she hardly knows?" The legal stakes were staggering. Virginia law gave Harrison total control over Margaret's marriage until she wed or turned 21. Witnesses Judge Petton and Dr. Fitzgerald, both beyond reproach, had seen everything. The agreement was binding, but socially, the fallout would be ruinous. Word would spread, and Harrison's standing and, possibly the reputations of all involved, would crumble. A father wagering his daughter's life defied every expectation of honor and responsibility. Marcus had left quietly satisfied, promising to return the next day to settle details. He had shaken Harrison's hand with a show of sympathy, but the glint of triumph in his eyes betrayed that this was the outcome he had wanted all along. By dawn, Harrison forced himself to face what he dreaded most: telling Margaret. He found her in the morning room, reading poetry over breakfast. She looked up, startled by his weary face. "Papa, you look dreadful. Were you up all night at cards?" He sat across from her, studying every feature of her face as though to memorize it. At 18, Margaret was striking her mother's elegance, her own sharp mind and strength. She could have chosen from the finest families in Virginia, but instead, her fate had been stolen by one hand of poker. "Margaret," Harrison began, his throat tightening. How could he even say it? How could he put into words what could never be undone? "Papa," she whispered, growing frightened. "What's wrong?" Harrison drew a deep breath and began to explain the unexplainable. As Harrison spoke, he watched his daughter's face shift, first confusion, then disbelief, and finally, a cold, sharp fury that reminded him uncomfortably of Marcus Bogard's own calculating stare. When he finished, Margaret sat in silence for several long minutes. The sunlight pouring through the windows lit her auburn hair like fire, and in that moment she looked more like her late mother than ever before. "Let me be certain I understand," she said at last, her voice low and controlled. "You gambled away my future marriage against Caesar's freedom and lost." The hand was nearly unbeatable. "Margaret, the odds of Marcus holding exactly what he needed. I don't care about the odds." "Papa," she cut in, her tone slicing through his excuse like a knife. "You had no right, no matter how strong your cards were." Harrison tried to argue the law gave fathers full authority over their daughters' marriages. Most unions in their world were arranged anyway. It was simply the custom of their class. But even as the words left his mouth, he could hear how empty they sounded. Margaret rose, her breakfast untouched. "When will Master Bogard arrive to claim his prize?" she asked coldly. Harrison winced at her use of the word prize. "This afternoon, most likely. We need to settle. Arrangements. Arrangements," she repeated, her voice dripping with scorn. "How thoughtful of you both to plan out the practical details of my captivity." She swept from the room without another word, leaving Harrison crushed by the realization that he had not only lost her future, but perhaps her trust forever. Marcus Bogard arrived at Thorngate precisely at 2 o'clock, dressed in his finest, carrying himself like a man, savoring his triumph. Beside him was a thin, twitchy lawyer from Richmond named Silas Crawford, who clutched a leather satchel, bulging with documents. Harrison received them in the study, where the fateful game had been played. By daylight the room looked different. The cards and chips were gone, but the smell of smoke and bourbon lingered in the walls, giving the air a closeness that was almost suffocating. "Harrison, my dear friend," Marcus said smoothly, as he settled into the same chair as the night before. "I trust you've had time to accept our new arrangement." "I've had time to regret it," Harrison answered flatly. "But a gentleman pays his debts." Marcus's cold smile flickered. "Indeed, and so Mr. Crawford has prepared everything we need. Marriage contract, deed of transfer for Caesar, and every other legal formality." The lawyer laid the papers neatly across the table, and Harrison felt his stomach twist. They were airtight, meticulously drawn up, covering every possible detail. Marcus hadn't improvised last night, he had prepared for this, maybe even planned it from the beginning. "There is one issue," Harrison said, glancing at the marriage contract. "Margaret is resistant." Marcus chuckled softly. "I would expect nothing less from a strong-willed young woman, but she'll come to appreciate what I offer. And if she refuses, she cannot. Virginia law is on your side. The contract makes your authority binding." A soft knock interrupted them. Caesar entered with a tea tray. He moved differently than he had the night before, no longer shaking, but carrying himself with a resigned dignity that unsettled Harrison more than fear ever could. "Master Harrison," Caesar said evenly, setting down the tray. "Miss Margaret requests to speak with you and Master Bogard. We're in the middle of business." Harrison began. "She said to remind you, this business involves her directly. She has a right to be heard." Marcus's eyes lit with curiosity. "By all means, let the young lady speak." Margaret entered moments later, every step regal. She had changed into a gown of deep blue silk, her hair arranged high, making her look years older, more queen than daughter. "Master Bogard," she said with flawless politeness, "congratulations are in order." Marcus stood and bowed lightly. "Miss Rutherford, the congratulations belong to me. I am most fortunate indeed." "Indeed," Margaret replied, her voice calm but edged in a way only her father recognized. "I wished to discuss the terms of our engagement with you." "Both." Harrison began to protest. The terms were already decided, but Margaret silenced him with a raised hand. "I know the law leaves me no choice. My father's wager has made me a prize to be claimed. No different than Caesar here." She gestured toward the enslaved man at the door. "But I think you should know exactly what sort of wife you're marrying, Master Bogard." Marcus leaned forward, clearly amused. "Do tell." Margaret's smile was radiant and ruthless all at once, the same expression her mother had once worn. "I will honor the contract. I will stand in a church and speak the vows. I will live in your house and bear the title of your wife." "That sounds very proper," Marcus said. "Smug, but," she continued, lowering her voice until it carried a deadly weight, "I will never share your bed. I will never give you children. And I will dedicate every day of my life to making you regret ever winning me at that table. You may own me on paper, Master Bogard, but you will never truly possess me." The silence that followed was heavier than when Marcus had revealed his winning card the night before. Silas Crawford looked ready to vanish into the wallpaper. Caesar stood rigid, though Harrison thought he saw approval flicker in his eyes. Marcus's mask cracked at last, his tone sharp with anger. "Miss Rutherford, perhaps you misunderstand the institution of marriage. A wife's duties are both moral and legal." "Oh, I understand perfectly," Margaret replied, "but I also understand that, while you may compel me to marry, you cannot compel me to yield. And a wife determined to be unhappy can make her husband's life very miserable." Indeed, just when it seemed the tension could not rise any higher, the sound of wheels on gravel announced a carriage's arrival. A moment later, Judge Petton strode into the room unannounced, his face pale and set, an official-looking document clutched in his hand. "Harrison, Marcus," he said grimly, "we have a problem." The room's atmosphere shifted instantly. The old judge's controlled demeanor was fraying. His eyes swept over the documents, Margaret's defiance, and Caesar's quiet watchfulness before landing on Harrison. "Cornelius," Harrison said, rising uneasily. "What's wrong? What's wrong?" Petton echoed, his voice heavy with unspoken consequence. "Seems our little poker game last night has caught the wrong kind of attention," Judge Petton said, lifting a paper sealed with the crest of the Commonwealth of Virginia. "This arrived at my office 2 hours ago. It's a formal inquiry from the Attorney General investigating what they describe as unlawful gambling, involving enslaved individuals and even coercive marriage contracts." Marcus went pale. "How Could they possibly know? Because, Petton cut in sharply, someone reported it. Someone who was present. Someone who understood exactly what they were witnessing. Every gaze shifted toward Caesar, standing silently by the door. His calm demeanor hadn't wavered all morning, but now there was a flicker of something new in his expression's satisfaction. "You," Harrison whispered. "You reported this." Caesar met his master's eyes without flinching. For the first time, there was no trace of subservience. "Master Harrison, you taught me how to read, to write, about business, and law, about the power of records. Did you really think I wouldn't understand what last night meant?" The words hit like a hammer. Marcus shot up from his chair, mask of respectability crumbling. "You traitorous careful." "Master Bogard," Caesar interrupted, still steady. "You may hold my title. But Virginia law protects enslaved people from being assaulted in front of witnesses." Judge Petton sank into his seat, realization dawning heavy. "Caesar, what exactly did you report?" "That for prominent Virginia gentlemen gambled with human lives as stakes. That they bound a young woman to a forced marriage contract. I included detailed descriptions, names, terms, and sworn testimony." Silas Crawford, the lawyer, frantically shuffled papers. "This could nullify everything we've signed. If the Attorney General rules this poker game as human trafficking, which it was," Margaret cut in smoothly. "Caesar, you brilliant man." Harrison stared at Caesar, stunned. "But why? If the inquiry goes forward, you could be punished. Enslaved people who accuse their masters face brutal consequences." "I know," Caesar said. "But last night, dealing those cards, I realized I was done being property. Done being passed around like livestock. And if I was going to be punished for speaking truth, then I would make sure that truth was worth the cost." He stepped to the center of the room, voice carrying. "While you gentlemen drowned in cards and bourbon, I was thinking of Miss Margaret's future, of my own. That game embodied everything rotten in our society, that human beings can be treated as tokens on a table." Marcus paced, near frantic. "This is madness. The game was among gentlemen, by agreed rules, rules that turned people into chips," Petton answered grimly. "And Caesar, I must tell you, your report could ruin every man here. The Attorney General doesn't just investigate, they prosecute." Caesar reached inside his jacket, unfolding another paper. "Then you should also know I sent letters this morning, to editors in Richmond, Charleston, and Washington. By tomorrow, the story will be in print." The silence was suffocating. Harrison felt the ground vanish beneath him. An investigation could perhaps be buried with influence, but newspaper headlines would scorch reputations beyond repair. "You've destroyed us," Dr. Fitzgerald whispered. "No," Caesar said evenly. "You destroyed yourselves. I only recorded it." Margaret stepped to his side. Their unity was effortless, as if it had always been there. "How did you even know how to pull this off? The legal filings, the press contacts." Caesar smiled faintly, the first since entering the room. "Because you weren't the only one learning in this house. While Master Harrison taught me accounts, I studied law, politics, the power of information. I've been writing abolitionists in Richmond for over a year, learning strategies. And now, your own lessons have become my weapons." The brilliance of it sank in. Caesar hadn't just exposed them legally. He'd forced their scandal into the public eye. Too serious to ignore, too vile to cover quietly. Any attempt to silence it would only fan the flames. Harrison looked around, realizing his one reckless game had put everything at risk: his estate, his position, his alliances, even his daughter's future. "There's more," Petton added, voice heavy. "The Attorney General is weighing broader charges: trafficking, coercion, conspiracy under gambling law. These are not civil matters. They're felonies. Prison terms." Caesar gazed out the window at the fields of enslaved laborers. and the cruelest irony. You taught me everything I needed to bring you down. You trusted me with your accounts, spoke to me as an equal in private, and then you gambled me like a prize bull. Dr. Fitzgerald broke his long silence. Cornelius, surely there's a way to keep this quiet. We're respected men. That's precisely the issue. Petton cut him off. Because we're respected, the scrutiny will be merciless. The Attorney General cannot be seen shielding planters who gamble with human lives. Marcus stopped pacing, turned on Caesar. What do you want? Money? Freedom? Say it, and we'll bargain. You still don't see, Caesar answered at once, his voice cutting sharp. I didn't report this to strike a deal. I reported it because it was a crime. The only thing I want is justice. The word hung in the air like thunder. In 1847 Virginia, for an enslaved man to claim justice against his masters was unthinkable. Yet Caesar had twisted the very system used to shackle him into a blade of defense. And besides, he went on, it's far too late. The letters are sent. The investigation is underway. By morning, your game will be common knowledge across 3 states. The damage is sealed. Margaret touched his arm, tears brimming. Caesar, you saved me, and you saved yourself, he replied softly. You just didn't know it yet. You carry your mother's spirit, Caesar said softly. I only offered some legal guidance. The documents scattered on the poker table suddenly felt less like contracts, and more like criminal evidence. Marcus lunged for the marriage papers, but Judge Petton's hand shot out. Don't touch them, he warned. Those documents are now part of an active investigation. Tampering would be obstruction of justice. Harrison finally found his voice. Then, what happens now? Now, Judge Petton replied grimly, we wait. Investigators from the Attorney General's office will arrive. They'll question each of us, review every document, and collect witness testimony. It could take weeks, maybe months. Until then, all agreements from last night are frozen. Margaret cannot be forced into marriage, and Caesar's ownership transfer is suspended. Marcus's face tightened as his schemes unraveled. This is outrageous. I won that game fairly. You gambled with human beings, Margaret shot back coldly. Tell me, in what world is that fair? Before Marcus could answer, the sound of carriages thundered up the drive. Through the window, the men saw the seal of the Commonwealth emblazoned on the arriving coaches. The investigators had come far sooner than expected. Gentlemen, Petton said, rising and straightening his coat. Prepare yourselves. This will be the hardest legal battle of our lives. What followed became legendary in Virginia legal history, though the files would remain locked in archives for more than a century. For 3 weeks, investigators occupied Thorngate Manor interviewing witnesses, combing through ledgers, dissecting testimony from across Pennsylvania County. At the head of the team was Catherine Henley, one of the first women ever employed as a legal clerk in the Attorney General's office. Her very presence scandalized the men, and her sharp questioning cut through their defenses. She exposed not only the poker game itself, but the corrupt society that had made it possible. Her first interrogation of Harrison lasted 6 relentless hours, leaving him shattered. At one point she asked, Master Rutherford, how does a father justify wagering his daughter's happiness on a deck of cards? Was it arrogance, desperation, or simply disregard for her well-being? Harrison's stammering silence haunted him for the rest of his life. Caesar's testimony proved even more devastating. With precise knowledge of plantation accounts and a clear grasp of power dynamics, he revealed the truth. Master Rutherford didn't merely risk his daughter. He wagered her, because losing her was the ultimate show of power, the ability to dictate another's entire existence with the flip of a card. And Master Bogard wasn't after love. He wanted ownership. The investigation unearthed Marcus Bogard's darker past. Charleston records tied him to illegal slave trading and fraudulent land deals. It became clear he had fled South Carolina to dodge prosecution, not to reinvent himself as a gentleman planter. Worse still, evidence suggested this wasn't his first marriage wager. Similar schemes in Charleston and Savannah had gone unchecked, ignored by authorities dazzled by his wealth. Judge Petton's participation created a constitutional nightmare. As both player and judge, his role forced the Attorney General to bring in prosecutors from other states. The scandal soon reached Virginia's legislature, prompting new laws against coercive marriage contracts and tighter controls on gambling. Petton's disgrace was profound. Once celebrated for progressive rulings, he was now reviled as a hypocrite. Dr. Fitzgerald, whose involvement was comparatively minor, broke ranks. He cooperated with investigators in exchange for leniency, corroborating Caesar's testimony and exposing Marcus's intentions. But his cooperation ruined him socially. Patients abandoned his practice, colleagues whispered, and his reputation never recovered. Meanwhile, Caesar's letters to the press ignited public outrage. Editorials across the South questioned not only the poker game, but the entire moral foundation of slavery and patriarchy. One powerful column in the Richmond Enquirer asked, if so-called gentlemen can gamble away human lives as casually as horse races, what does that say of our society? If a father can wager his daughter's future, what protection is left for any woman? The saga dragged on until spring of 1848, nearly a year after the infamous game. Marcus Bogard was convicted of conspiracy to traffic in human beings and sentenced to 10 years in prison, along with heavy fines and a permanent ban on property ownership in Virginia. He died behind bars 3 years later, officially from pneumonia, though rumors suggested otherwise. Harrison Rutherford escaped criminal conviction but paid dearly in other ways. Civil penalties drained his finances, political appointments vanished, and his name became a stain in Virginia society. Families shunned him, refusing even to consider Margaret as a bride despite her innocence. Crushing legal debts forced him to sell much of his land. By 1850, his once mighty plantation of nearly 200 enslaved workers had dwindled to fewer than 50. Judge Petton resigned in disgrace, reduced to petty civil cases until his death in 1852, his reputation in ruins. His family insisted he died of a broken heart, and Caesar. His fate was more complicated. The investigation halted his transfer to Marcus, but did not grant him freedom. Virginia law had no provision for liberating an enslaved person who exposed his masters, yet public sympathy swelled. The resolution came from Margaret herself, on her 21st birthday in 1850. She used her inheritance from her mother's estate to purchase Caesar's freedom. The manumission was carried out publicly, with newspapers across Virginia covering every detail, making it impossible for Harrison to interfere. Margaret's act of freeing Caesar was seen as her final rejection of her father's values and of the corrupt society that had allowed the poker game in the first place. The event where Caesar received his freedom papers was attended by abolitionists and reformers, turning it into a symbolic victory for the anti-slavery cause. Margaret used the scandal as a turning point. She rejected every marriage proposal and devoted herself to what would later be known as women's rights activism. She never married, instead becoming one of Virginia's first female property owners and a vocal advocate for reform. Her partnership with Caesar, now a free man, evolved into successful businesses that challenged social conventions throughout the 1850s. The poker game itself became legend whispered about for generations. Parents told it as a cautionary tale against gambling, while reformers cited it as proof of slavery's moral corruption. Over time the story was twisted and exaggerated, but its message never changed. Even the most powerful men can be destroyed by arrogance and cruelty. The Rutherford plantation survived, but never returned to its former glory. Harrison lived until 1863, dying just as the Civil War began, tearing apart the world that had sheltered his crimes. He spent his last years a broken man, isolated from friends and estranged from his daughter, who visited him only out of obligation. Their final conversation, witnessed by servants, was telling. "Papa," Margaret asked, "do you regret that poker game?" His reply was a faint whisper. "I regret everything that led to it, and everything that followed." The study where the fateful game was played was sealed after Harrison's death. Later owners reported strange sounds and side whispers, heated voices, even the shuffle of cards. Whether echoes of the past or something more supernatural, the room became a permanent reminder of how one night's game changed countless lives. The case left a deep mark on Virginia law. Known as the Caesar Wellington precedent, it created protections for witnesses who reported crimes by their superiors, and it helped dismantle the absolute authority fathers once held over their daughters' marriages. Most importantly, it proved that even within the machinery of slavery, determined individuals could turn the system against itself. Caesar's use of legal reporting became a model for reform efforts across the South. The original cards from that night, still smudged with fingerprints, were eventually donated to the Virginia Historical Society, where they remain a chilling artifact of how a single gamble echoed through history. A final twist emerged in 1865, when Caesar published his memoir, From Property to Person, My Journey from Slavery to Freedom. It became a Northern bestseller, offering the most detailed account of the poker game ever written. His eloquence and sharp psychological insight made the book a powerful weapon in the fight against slavery. But the memoir revealed something shocking. Caesar admitted that he had secretly rigged the deck that night, ensuring Marcus's victory. He wrote, "I knew if Harrison won, both Miss Margaret and I would remain trapped. By letting Master Bogard win, I created a scandal so outrageous it couldn't be buried." Sometimes the only way to defeat injustice is to help it destroy itself. This tale reminds us that even in a world built on oppression, individuals could still demand justice and dignity. The power structures of 1847. Virginia, so untouchable at the time, proved vulnerable to the simple act of truth, spoken boldly. So what do you think? Was everything revealed that night, or are secrets still buried in the dusty archives of Pennsylvania County? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with someone who loves dark mysteries.